One of the things that you have looked closely at is GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. So as a category, it seems to be evolving recently. So what problems do you see with a GRC tool? What does it need to get right these days?
I think one of the biggest problems I've seen historically is when a GRC tool tries to be standalone, they really need to integrate with systems, especially, in my opinion, things like ticketing systems. And the GRC tool really needs to start working the way that the business works, not the other way around. And I've seen GRC projects fail because they didn't introduce or they didn't integrate with existing tool sets. They were basically like a technology island that no one wanted to go and visit. You need to look at your approach to risk management as well when you're rolling out a GRC tool, because the tool is going to make you more efficient, reduce friction and workload, and guide you through a process. But it's not going to fix something. Trust no one and still verify them. That's kind of my shortcut way. So how can we make sure that the person that is connecting into our systems is really the person that we want to be connecting into our systems? And we can do that through things like multi-factor authentication, starting to move towards passwordless architectures, etc. That's kind of where I think is probably the best way forward with zero trust architectures. You can take it a lot further. We start looking at SASE, where we start exposing applications externally in a very secure manner.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cyber Safe Tech Talk series. Today, we have with us a very esteemed professional whose name is Charles Gillman. Charles is a highly skilled cybersecurity professional with a career spanning more than 2 decades. He has made significant contributions to the industry and built a reputation as a leader and expert in the field. Charles' work experience includes holding Chief Information Security Officer roles in the financial services and cloud and managed services sectors. He has also built and led information security teams in major banks, providing him with a comprehensive understanding of the current security landscape. Throughout his career, Charles has been actively involved in the cybersecurity community and shared his insights and participated in discussions on topics such as GRC, which stands for Governance, Risk, Compliance, CISO roles, cybercrime, cybersecurity, and information security. His expertise encompasses security consulting, ethical hacking, cybercrime research, security architecture, and security operations. In his current role as CISO at SuperChoice, Charles is responsible for ensuring effective cybersecurity and mitigating risks. He faces the evolving challenges of cyber threats and develops strategies to manage and minimize risk while keeping up with the latest security trends and technologies. All of these make up for the setting for a fantastic discussion that I look forward to having with you, Charles. I'll be diving into your history, your journey, and also asking you forward-looking questions. Thank you for joining us on this show.
Great. Thank you, Pramodh, for having me.
Perfect. Let us dive right into this. One of the things that you have looked closely at is GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. So as a category, it seems to be evolving recently. What problems, let's start with the problems, right? Because things evolve when there are problems and they go towards a better state. So what problems do you see with a GRC tool? What does it need to get right these days?
Look, I think one of the biggest problems I've seen historically is when a GRC tool tries to be standalone. They really need to integrate with systems, especially, in my opinion, things like ticketing systems. And the GRC tool really needs to start working the way that the business works, not the other way around. And I've seen GRC projects fail because they didn't introduce or they didn't integrate with existing tool sets. They were basically like a technology island that no one wanted to go and visit. So, you need to look at your approach to risk management as well when you're rolling out a GRC tool. Because the tool is going to make you more efficient, reduce friction and workload, and guide you through a process. But it's not going to fix something that was broken in the first place. So there's no point in automating a broken process. You need to make sure that you've got those processes right and what you want to get out of the tool up front before you go and implement that tool.
Thanks for sharing. I'll come back to GRC in a bit. As you were speaking, one question that crossed my mind was what motivated you to get started in cybersecurity as a domain and then specialize in it?
I think I really fell into it by accident. I was working for a company that was doing some website integrations for some large companies, and they kept asking us, how are you building security into this? How are you making sure it's secure? And that really sparked my interest in security. And it was from there that I actually ended up going and doing like an ethical hands-on hacking course, and that just really opened my eyes. And I decided I didn't want to be a defender; I wanted to be an attacker. And I moved into security there with a view to try and get into something like penetration testing.
Beautiful. And so began your journey into this world. It's changed quite a bit, I imagine, over the past 2 decades. Can you talk a little bit about the changes that you have personally been through?
It was a lot simpler. We were really looking back then at hacktivists and website defacements and script kiddies. And I think it was only really later on that the cyber criminals entered into that domain. So I've really seen that change from people kind of hacking almost out of interest and just almost nuisance value through to now seeing these full cyber criminal gangs that are quite organized.
Yeah. And the way they're organized, I mean, if I were to share my journey, I spent about 10 years building companies. And then I thought, there's information security was always at the edge of my radar. I know that it's important, but when you're building companies, your goal is to go to market and drive competitive advantages there. And so when I went through our first breach in one of the companies I was building, that's when information security came front and center into my world. And now it's like a mission, right? What I've noticed is the other side is very, very organized and also loosely coupled. So this is an interesting setup. You have people who are as young as maybe 10, 11 years old, who are just having fun in their parents' homes, hacking away, but hacking away at big companies, right? You also have, on the other end, nation states that are very organized, ranked officials who are conducting cybersecurity attacks. They can take their time. It's not like a one-time thing. It's like something that they can be working on for years and years before they get the outcomes that they want, right? From your point of view, I'm sure you have seen both sides, right? How can we set up businesses to defend against such a risk?
I think every business now needs some level of security function. If we look at the very small organizations, maybe they've outsourced that. But I think every organization needs a security function that's looking across the business holistically to go and address the threats and working in preference against a framework, whether that's something as simple as NIST CSF or ISO 27001 or right up to things like SOC 2. So I think having that framework, not that compliance gives you security, but it helps you to enable security and certainly measure security.
Yes. So compliance doesn't mean security, like you said, and security doesn't mean compliance. But what you're saying is it gives you the framework now to start thinking about it and organizing ourselves. And this is important for businesses of all sizes, is your point of view?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's having that structure and that framework to work against is very important.
Okay. So then let's come back to this GRC topic. There is an aspect where there's a discussion that we have been having with some of our partners and also internally at CyberSierra. Is it useful to have point solutions, or is it useful to have like a overarching solution that looks to solve a set of problems, within one solution, right? I'm not naming tools and companies, but what I'm trying to say is it better for us to look at a company and say, hey, solve this specific problem for me? Or should we look at companies from a CISO perspective and say, you know what, if your tool is solving a broad area of problems, I'm interested. How's your point of view?
Oh, definitely. As a CISO, I think I want less vendors. I want less dashboards. And I will take a solution that's maybe 80 or 90% as good from an existing vendor rather than trying to integrate and bring on board another vendor. And I think there's a lot to be said for the cloud service providers, your big public clouds, where they've got a lot of those security controls already built into their platforms that you can leverage already. And I think too often we see people deploying security controls that overlap with other security controls, and we're maybe not always using the features or the tool to its full extent before we go out and start looking at other tools or other point solutions. So I would rather a very large integrated solution that maybe isn't as good as individual point solutions, but if I've kind of got one dashboard, one console, and one vendor to deal with, for me, that's preferable. Otherwise, we end up with a lot of technology sprawl and too many of these overlapping controls that we're not necessarily getting the best out of.
Thanks for sharing this. Let's dive a little bit more into this, right? Because as a CISO, your mind can only take so much before cognitive overload starts to happen.
That's right.
And when you were working in more mature environments where budget was not so much of a constraint, you were able to have teams under you that would specialize in different problem areas related to information security. Then when you work for, or when you help companies which are smaller, they may not have that same kind of budget. They may not have the same kind of expertise in their team, but they are still also getting equally targeted because, for the state actors and also for the hobbyist hackers, right? Everyone's a target. Wherever you can get in, you go ahead and get in. There's some scripts that are deployed where what I've seen is like a database going live within 9 minutes getting breached, right? So that can't be human. There must be some kind of script that is running. How should we organize ourselves from an InfoSec perspective in a less mature environment? Because I know for a mature environment, there are a lot of mature discussions as well. But for the less mature environment where businesses are waking up to the risk of cyber, what is your recommendation? Like what are the first 3 to 5 things that we should look out for if they're starting to look at cyber seriously?
Look, I think the first thing is always to try and do some sort of gap analysis of where the business is compared to its peers or against a framework. So we should really start baselining and then look at what is in our risk register or what the current threats are to that business or to that environment or just in general what the threat landscape's looking like, and then prioritize the security controls based on the risk. So it's always got to be risk driven. It doesn't matter what size the organization. In terms of how can a smaller company deal with that, there's plenty of companies out there that specialize in consulting or helping those small to medium-sized enterprises skill up. And we can also build up the skills of our own teams internally. I've often found in many organizations that I've worked in that there's someone in the engineering team or someone in the operations team that has a keen interest in security. And you can start to use those people like a virtual security team, if you like, because they've got that passion already.
Thanks. That would be the base, right? I mean, what you just shared to me, let's take that as the base. Now, we can probably get that in place as quickly as maybe within a month or 2 months for a small or medium-sized business. What else can they do to remain, to grow their resilience in the current cyber environment? How would you iterate this program? Yeah, sort of recommending a program almost.
No, they need some sort of strategy. And, I like to look at a strategy as taking in all of your drivers. And I think you need to start with the business first and the business drivers. What's the business trying to achieve? And how can you actually help the business deliver on those outcomes securely? So it shouldn't necessarily be tools focused. Then we need to start looking, from a risk perspective, what are our critical assets? Because especially if you're a small company, it's going to be difficult to protect every asset, but you really need to protect the assets that matter. Where are your key data assets? Where are the assets that actually generate you revenue? Those are what you should be prioritizing first. That is what you should be protecting. And then, if you look at a framework, and I like NIST, CSF, you need to be looking at those detect and protect and respond and recover controls for those business critical assets. So that's the program that I would start at, looking at my threats and risks to my critical assets and then protecting those and then working my way down. But I think one of the biggest vectors for how attackers get into organizations is really through identities. So that at some point, whether they've exploited a vulnerability, that exploit code is running under the context of a user, whether that's the root user or on Linux or the system user on Windows. We need to start looking at our access and identity management because identity is now the perimeter. It's not the firewall, because people are, working remotely, working from home. We've changed how the tools work. If you look at some of the things like Microsoft Office 365, you can work on that anywhere. You don't have to be connected to the VPN anymore to talk to a mail server, or to have a look at your intranet. So I think protecting the business assets, understanding the business, and then certainly protecting those identities, having those controls. MFA is a really easy one for a small organization. As you get bigger, things like zero trust architectures are certainly the way to go. So really looking at what you're protecting, especially in terms of assets and identities.
Charles, you mentioned something which has been trending in our mind quite a bit, but I don't see a lot of businesses doing this yet. This thing about zero trust architectures. Could you help define zero trust and then just share a bit more about it?
I don't know that I'm very good at defining zero trust, but what it really is about is trust no one and still verify them. That's kind of my shortcut way. So how can we make sure that the person that is connecting into our systems is really the person that we want to be connecting into our systems? And we can do that through things like multi-factor authentication, starting to move towards passwordless architectures, etc. So yeah, that's kind of where I think is probably the best way forward with zero trust architectures. You can take it a lot further. We start looking at SASE, where we start exposing applications externally in a very secure manner. But yeah, that's kind of my 2-minute zero trust, which is probably not the best description.
Oh, that's a great start. Thanks for sharing about it. And zero trust is I think for a lot of folks, it exists at the conceptual level. And then in terms of implementation, it's not yet really in the orgs, right? So I'm trying to bring practical stuff, right?
It's very much a process, not a product.
Yes. Process, not a product. And that process needs to be brought into a company. How? Through a policy or through a program? Like, is it as simple as, let me set up an information security policy and talk about zero trust, or is it a program?
I think it's both, because the policy is defining the what, if you like, and that security program or that security strategy is really defining the how. And the policy will also be defining the why as well.
Got it. Thanks for sharing. We've gone quite deep into company. Let's zoom right out and look at this from an ecosystem perspective. And this is actually coming back to one of our discussions we had in the past, which it caused a shift in my thinking. And I like to attribute that shift in thinking to you. It was, in our preparation call. So cybersecurity, we know it needs to be taken seriously, but we are working in an environment where there are a lot of penalties. Like, if you get this wrong, this is the fine, this is a jail term, and so on and so forth, right? And I think countries across the world, they are evolving their cybersecurity law and policies in a view where there is a lot of penalties in mind. I think you shared something to me. I don't want to steal the thunder to it. Would you please share, what else can we do besides having more penalties?
Oh, look, I think we can, certainly educate. So, we need to integrate. We really need to integrate cybersecurity better with the rest of the business. And too often we're an afterthought, but we can also be viewed as techies wearing hoodies. So we need like a cultural shift both ways, where we need to be viewed more as part of the business, and then we also need to start making sure that we're integrating ourselves better as part of the business. So really, it's two ways. I think there's also a top-down and bottom-up approach. So business leaders, like company executives, the board and directors, need to place more emphasis on cyber and understanding cyber. And I think that's definitely happening. And we also need a better cyber education shift. So not just educating our staff, but maybe starting to educate right back into high school. So really bringing people up to speed to actually understand what the risks are, because we don't really start teaching people about cyber until maybe they go to university or start their first role.
For cybersecurity to be taken seriously as well, you spoke about education system, that it needs to be set up in such a way that we are equipped to deal with cyber risk. It's becoming a societal problem. Can you share more? What needs to be done in our education system?
Look, we need to start educating a lot earlier. I personally would like to see cyber training as part of it, like a high school curriculum. It just needs to be another subject along with, maths and science and everything else. So I did hear someone the other day talking about when they went to school and they learned computers, they learned how to Google. And it's like, I think we've come a long way from there where kids are very technically savvy, but we need to teach them, firstly how to protect themselves online, but then also, how they can actually protect the organizations that they work for when they start going out into the workforce. Just give them the broader context and understanding around cyber.
Okay. What's interesting is when I was in school studying computer science, cybersecurity wasn't too much of an emphasis. We're learning how to build, right? Building is tough enough, like getting your databases right, programming languages, CS 101, networks, so on and so forth, right? I think now we have to also include cyber as part of the CS programs, as well as boot camps. I see that shift. I see it offered as an elective. But I think what needs to happen is within each module that we are being taught, especially mandatory modules, we have to have a topic on cyber. Like if you are learning how to set up an endpoint, you have to think about cyber while you're setting up an endpoint. When you're setting up, let's say, a network, you have to think about how to secure it. So cyber and innovation or cyber and building, they have to be synonymous. I feel that is a trend that's already started. Maybe it'll take like 5 years or so before it comes out into society at large. And for the rest of us who are already in the industry, we have to pick it up by ourselves by through discussions like this. Is there anything else that we can do in your opinion?
No, I really like your idea of incorporating cyber just not as a standalone subject, but as an adjunct to everything people are doing, whether that's development or building out infrastructure. And then if you start to look at, some of these agile companies where we've got, these full stack developers, when we talk about full stack, we actually don't include security in that full stack. And I think that's what things like DevSecOps tries to address, but it would be good just to make it to include security in that full stack description.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing this. Switching gears a bit, how's your experience been with cyber insurance? There's all this work we're doing with cybersecurity, right? We work hard day in, day out, right? How's your view on cyber insurance?
Thankfully, I've not had to call on it. But I think cybersecurity insurance is really important, but maybe not necessarily for the reasons that you think of. So most companies, when they're doing, business to business transactions, will have contracts, master services agreements between them. And they will typically call for a level of cybersecurity insurance as mandatory as part of the contract. And they might even define the level of cover that's required. And this is to give the actual client some level of confidence that if the organization does have a breach, that they could actually adequately recover. And so if you do have a breach, you're going to end up having higher premiums. And in the worst case scenario, you might not even be able to renew at all. And I think that will certainly affect that organization's ability to trade, because they can no longer meet the terms and conditions of the contract, which is, to hold a cybersecurity policy. So I think that's certainly an interesting angle on it. I think the premiums are just going to continue going up, and cybersecurity insurance isn't necessarily the get out of jail free card that a lot of people think it is. I've heard many times of organizations where they've claimed their cybersecurity insurance, and it either gets into this protracted discussion, or sometimes even legal, between the insurer and the organization as to whether they should pay out or not. And I've heard a couple of times now where the payout has taken 3 years. So the business has actually really had to self-fund their recovery in that time. And, maybe a certain point down the road, whether that's 12, 24 or 36 months later, then they're actually getting the money back. So I don't think it's that golden ticket to get out of jail free that people necessarily think it is. but it definitely has some upsides. So a lot of the cyber insurers have realized their importance, especially in things like ransomware. And so they will actually make resources available to you. So they'll either contract with a company to help you work through that breach. And so even if you don't have those skills, the forensic skills, they will actually have preferred suppliers or people that you can deal with that can actually help you through that breach process where you might not have those skills. So there's some really big benefits to it.
Thank you for sharing about this. I believe it'll be useful for our audience to hear. What threats are you seeing nowadays that are growing significantly?
Definitely ransomware, and I think that will continue, but just ransomware now morphing into extortion and double extortion. So, threatening to release the records on the dark web or selling those client records. So I think that's certainly growing and will probably continue to grow because that is a potential source of revenue. And these guys are just, working on earning money. So they don't care how they get their money. So their model is just to generate money. So I think that's certainly going to grow. And that's definitely a concern.
How is it different now than it was 5 years ago when somebody would, get into your database, encrypt it, or extract data and ask you for ransom?
I think it's changed because the tools have got better at detecting it. And file encryption itself actually creates a lot of system I/O. So whether that's CPU usage, memory usage, disk I/O, and that's a lot easier to detect than, for example, data exfiltration. So I think it's easier to detect those encryptions. Our tools are getting better at it. And I've actually seen cases in previous roles where those sort of actions, the file encryptions or the high I/O, was actually detected by standard monitoring tools. All of a sudden a service, sitting at 100% CPU or whatever. So a lot easier to detect. So I think there's a real shift to, this is why they're shifting to that extortion and potentially double extortion by doing the data exfiltration rather than just encrypting the data.
And the state seems to have evolved in such a way that ransomware is being offered as a service. Like it's gotten so organized that there are tools out there, just like how you have software as a service. Now you have ransomware software as a service. So anyone can just download it and use it, and they can share the proceeds without people knowing each other. That's how loosely coupled it is.
Yeah, definitely. But I think cybercrime as a service has been around for quite a while. They certainly run it like a business. I don't know if you saw the Conti leaks where they were talking about all of the different, parts of the business, like initial access brokers and people that did the negotiations with companies. But they were driving people to incentives and KPIs. Like they would actually dock people's pay, if they weren't available when they were needed, things like that. So they're really running it like a business. And you can buy different things. So there's people that specialize in breaking in. There are people that specialize in doing the phishing, and people specializing right up to writing the exploit code. And so it's run like a business, and we really got to treat it like we're dealing with a very well-armed kind of hostile business. And there has been cases where they've taken people from developing countries, or the countries where the wages aren't great, and they're taking some of the top university graduates and then bringing them into the cybercrime organization because they're going to earn 5 times what they're going to earn if they went to a job straight away, and they have to find the job in the first place.
So with an adversary that is so organized and so advanced, I think when normal people hear what you said, and it's very important what you said. The reason is, remember I said earlier in this recording that many years ago, information security was at the edge of my radar. Now it's front and center. I feel that this is a case for many people. It is at the edge that they know it's a risk, but it's not such an observable risk. It's not something that is life-threatening so much, right? But when it happens, it creates all kinds of issues, right? It's so important for you to share what you shared. Once we have understood what the adversary is and the range of adversaries that we're dealing with, for the normal person, it might feel overwhelming, and you might go like, I should just give up, digital transformation is nice and good, but maybe I'll just delay it, or maybe I'll just do it to a limited extent. And it's a reasonable way to think, to be honest, right? What advice would you have for someone like that? And when I was asking this question, I was thinking about the work that you have done with other organized outfits that are trying to protect this kind of businesses, the ones that are playing on the good side.
Right. I think this does maybe the opposite. I think when people realize how organized and determined these organizations are, that it should actually, I would like to think, inspire a sense of urgency, and certainly for those organizations that, or individuals that didn't realize how big the threat was, to go out and seek some of that external advice. And governments are definitely supporting that. We've here in Australia, we've got the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, and they do provide a lot of information for those small to medium-sized businesses to help them. So I think governments are doing what they can, but governments can't, their hands are often tied. So I really think it should ignite that sense of urgency in those people rather than the opposite. Because I think if you give in, then you've lost.
Thank you for sharing this. So personally, as a CISO, you would have been on the receiving end of multiple attempts, to breach systems and so on, right? Whether it's under simulation scenario or whether it's an actual attack. What was one of the biggest challenges that you face as a CISO, and therefore how did you handle it?
I think it's working out, especially when you're newer to security, about what really matters in terms of threats. I remember the days when people used to use firewall drops as a metric. We got 5,000 port scans, and using that as a metric, that to me is just like background noise on the internet. Now, sure, it can show you that it's a precursor to an attack, but there's just so much noise out there that it's very difficult to pick that kind of needle in a haystack. For me, I think you just need some of those more high fidelity metrics. Certainly things like if you can get that, if you can afford to pay for some of those dark web monitoring services and underground threat monitoring services, where you can actually see your infrastructure being targeted, whether that's in a chat room or your information available on the dark web. I think those are better fidelity, or higher fidelity rather, metrics for me to start being concerned about. But I think if we worried about every single, network scan or web application scan, I think we would never sleep. So we've got to look at what really matters, and what is actually behind that, because a lot of these attacks, they're just so numerous and non-stop that they're just background noise now.
Got it. And so, because there's so much of them, that it gets overwhelming, what emerging technologies are you excited about? Emerging technologies or trends in this space, in your space, in cybersecurity, that you're excited about?
Oh, definitely AI. I think you would be mad not to be interested and excited about AI. And from my point of view, certainly what can AI do to help security? So, I don't think we've seen the flip side yet of how well the bad guys are going to weaponize, but we're certainly seeing vendors like Microsoft, who now releasing tools like Security Copilot. So if you ever had to deal with the Microsoft ecosystem in terms of Azure AD and M365, there are just so many consoles. So it's almost overwhelming, the number of consoles, and trying to find all of the different controls and where you can monitor things and where you can enact policies. Having something like the Security Copilot, where you can just talk in natural language and actually get some of that threat hunting or get some of those configurations done quickly without having to navigate your way through. And I think that's going to really increase the productivity of analysts. There are also tools out there that you can actually start looking at alerts, and then the natural language processing will actually look at the alert and then explain in plain English what that alert is back to the analyst. And I think that helps with that comprehension. And then we've got Google, who've released their Google Cloud AI Workbench. Now, they bought Mandiant a while ago. Mandiant's been working on some AI technology, and collaboratively, they've built a large language model that it's actually tuned specifically to security called SecPalm. And I think having those AIs that are specifically built around dealing with security and security vulnerabilities and just even the language of security, and having those integrated into tools, I think is going to take us a long way.
So this is always a cat and mouse game, right? I mean, security
Arms
was
race. Yeah.
it's an arms race. So security was one, but now AI within cybersecurity is going to make things a lot more interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also going to help. We talk about a global skill shortage in security, and it's very hard to skill people up on the job because they're so busy, doing their day job. And I think we can actually use AI to start uplifting people's skills. So we can actually, I think there's certainly cases where you could take a level 1 SOC analyst and augment them with the right AI security tools and get them operating as a level 2 analyst and get a level 2 operating as a level 3. So I think it can actually provide uplift right across security. And tools like ChatGPT are really great for, things like answering questions about security, explaining security concepts. We've got tools like Microsoft's GitHub Copilot. They can actually help people write better code by identifying vulnerabilities in them. I've seen people use it, just even pasting code into ChatGPT and it identifying, common security vulnerabilities in that code. So I think the more the security industry leverages AI, and I think they're doing that very rapidly, faster than I thought they were going to do it, I think that's going to help upskill the whole security community.
Thanks for sharing that. Conversely, is there risk that or concerns that you have in your mind? What makes you worried nowadays?
About AI in particular?
Insecurity. AI, I believe, could be one. I think we can quite easily switch and say, there are probably large groups of people figuring out how to use AI to advance attacks, right? So that's very clear. We can talk about that as well. Would be great if you do. And also broadly as well for cybersecurity, what concerns you nowadays?
Oh, look, I think ransomware and nation states is certainly the thing that keeps me up at night. I think that is, as we discussed previously, that is the predominant threat, and something that we just have to keep vigilant. Keep uplifting our security controls, keep uplifting our resilience. So not just the protect and detect, but can we actually recover? Can we perform a business continuity or a disaster recovery exercise to emulate bringing all of our systems back online or restoring all of our systems from backups, for example. So just building that kind of resiliency into everything we do, because whether organizations like it or not, no matter how much they spend on security, the attackers only have to find one way in. And at some point, if you have been breached, you are going to actually have to exercise your BCP and disaster recovery policies, or plans rather.
There is a view in the industry that the best cyber professionals, they come from environments like, let's say, the military, or they come from the big tech environment, right? So if you have worked in a security team in Microsoft or Google or Facebook, then when you go out in the industry, you'll be able to do good work and the demand is very high. Equally, if you have worked in the military, for example, if you have worked in Israel's Unit 8200, then you're part of a very amazing community. But then the cyber risk is so vast and big that it's difficult for these folks. Basically, the risk is far larger than the supply of talent available to address the risk right now, right?
Yeah.
So in your view, what can regular product managers, developers, designers, and business leaders do to get into a good position from a cyber resilience perspective? And these guys are the ones, they are basically not from the elite and well-connected and trained groups that I spoke about earlier. What can the normal person do?
Yeah, right. I really liked your analogy about coming out of some of Israel's military, because they seem to have such amazing security startups, and I think that comes down to a mentality. They've actually dealt with conflict, and I've noticed that some of the best security people, and I'm slightly biased because I was a pen tester, but some of the best security people I know actually came out of pen testing because they saw what was actually possible, and then they can go and implement the countermeasures because they have that deep knowledge. But I think it's almost unreasonable to expect the product managers and the developers to come looking for security. It's really up to us to help them and guide them, provide them that security awareness training. And I don't necessarily mean traditional security awareness training, where we click next, but, taking them through real world scenarios, or getting them to have a look at not just the report that the pen tester does, but actually watching a video of the pen tester. And I've been in teams where we've used videos of someone actually breaking into something as a really good tool to show to management and developers, to actually show them how easy it was often, because hacking has kind of got this little mystique about it, where people think it's all matrix screens and people in black hoodies working on terminals and consoles. Actually, it's up to us to educate them all the way along. And rather than just saying security says you can't do this, it should be, yes, you can do this, but these are the things you need to do along the way to make sure that you're delivering a secure product, or you're building a secure product. So yeah, I don't think we're going to get those product people coming and looking for security. They're all about getting their products to market and services to market as quickly as possible. And as security practitioners, we should be helping them to do that in a secure way by guiding them.
Excellent. And as in building companies in the past, one of the things that I realized that we should build a more smoother interface with the security professionals. What I mean by that is, it's not just awareness. What you shared, I think, will benefit the audience, our audience tremendously. Additionally, the smoother interface part I think we should add here is, if let's say your designer is writing a design spec, or your product manager is writing product requirements document, or the engineer is writing an engineering spec, in those specs, there has to be a section which talks about security, because when you're designing an API, authentication, authorization, tokenizing it has to be there, right? And we have to think about how do we interface with our counterparts in the security team right at the time when we're designing it, and definitely before shipping it. Because if we're thinking of bringing in the security professionals, folks like yourself, asking you for your opinion and guidance after things are in production, things are a lot more dangerous and risky, right? So I feel in the development lifecycle, we should build a smoother interface where we work with our security counterparts closely.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's two aspects to that. If we look at the developers and the engineers, I think we really need to be, back to security awareness training, we need to be teaching them how to do threat modeling, right? Because they can't necessarily think about how the countermeasures until they've actually really thought about the threats. So we need to give them the framework and the policy saying, okay, you must use encryption, and this is what passwords look like in terms of strength and length, and an MFA. So give them the requirements, if you like, because security is basically a functional requirement inside of software, and we need to treat it like a functional requirement. It doesn't necessarily need to be special, just like security vulnerabilities are just bugs really at the developer, but with bigger implications. So I think we need to be training the developers on threat modeling to get them thinking about the threats and understanding the threats. And certainly if we look at something as simple as OWASP top 10, just getting them to understand those basics, but get them to threat model. And then what a lot of larger companies are doing is the BISO role, so the Business Information Security Officer. And that person's actually embedded inside of a business unit. So rather than security being separate, they're actually part of that business unit and helping to drive security outcomes as part of that team. rather than being from a separate team, trying to influence. So they're influencing from the inside out rather than from the outside in.
Thank you. That's very practical, actionable. Thanks for sharing your points of view. With that, we've come to the end of our discussion today. And there's a lot of insights that we have gleaned, which we'll be summarizing and sharing to our teams and our audience over time. So thanks so much for your time today, Charles. Are there any final words that you'd like to share to the folks?
No, nothing comes to mind, but thank you very much for having me on. And I hope some people got some little nuggets or gems out of our conversation that they can action.
Thank you so much, Charles.
Thank you.